Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard the Wright Flyer. Today's flight is piloted by Randy Wright, who is joined by his first officer Jeremy Grapenton. We know you have a choice when it comes to your radio listening pleasure, and would like to thank you for choosing to fly with the Wright Flyer. Ground traffic control has moved us to the departure lane, so please be seated, fasten your seatbelts, and ensure that all tray tables are stowed in the upright and locked position. We will be taking off shortly, and once again, we'd like to thank you for choosing to fly the Wright Flyer. Now sit back, relax, and enjoy the show as we soar above the friendly airwaves in comfort and style.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard the Wright Flyer. This is your captain speaking, and I would like to take this opportunity to personally welcome you to our state-of-the-art radio program. We know you have a choice when it comes to your radio listening pleasure, and would like to thank you for choosing to fly the Wright Flyer. What's more, we're confident no other radio program or venue will fly you over the friendly airwaves in as much comfort and style, nor leave you with an indelible yet pure sense of enlightenment, quite like we can here at the Wright Flyer. Now that you're aboard, please be seated, fasten your seatbelts, kick back, relax, and enjoy the show. We've taxied to the departure lane and are awaiting takeoff clearance from air traffic control. While they go through that mindless, bureaucratic red tape and regimentation, my first officer, Jeremy Grapenton, and I shall delve into the pre-flight checklist because there is a lot of news and information to get to before we may indulge you with your in-flight entertainment. Folks, our first story comes from CBS Los Angeles. Apparently, there is a new and disturbing viral video which reportedly depicts an LAPD officer being stalked. In the wake of all the violence that has been unleashed against law enforcement officers since this summer, I don't blame our law enforcement agencies for being rattled by this. This is indicative of a much greater problem that is haunting the United States right now. Jeremy and I have mentioned before how things have changed in this great nation of ours. When we were growing up, we were taught not only to think for ourselves, but also to respect figures of authority. It would have been unspeakable to call for violence against a police officer when we were young. It was understood that their primary purpose, even if a few bad apples abused their power, was to help maintain order within the community. Something has changed, and in a bad way. Today's youth, to use the term lightly, have all of the sudden turned against the police, as if they are some sort of domestic enemy. We don't seem to afford our officers the same presumption of innocence that we give to our criminals. This is the sort of chaos which is utilized by the radical and extremist left in order to force people to run to the government in order to embrace radical and permanent changes to the fabric of society. One would not be wrong in saying that this represents the sort of fundamental transformation that President Obama spoke of during his first campaign in 2008. It's right down the line of when he first attacked the police, claiming that they acted stupidly when arresting that professor when he attempted to break into his own home because he couldn't find his key. Anyhow, since the violence broke out this summer, and after that Harris County Sheriff's deputy was gunned down in cold blood, there can be no question that there is a movement in America which is targeting our law enforcement officers. Folks, I cannot condemn with more passion and more articulate words than I am now the actions of these radicals. These sniveling cowards do not represent the vast majority of Americans, and I think I am safe in assuming that they don't speak for most of you. I certainly know that these vile thugs don't speak for either Jeremy or me.
Well, I'm just going to start off by saying that if I behaved in the way that these little miscreants are in my community growing up, not only would it have been expected of the law enforcement officers to tan my hide, so to speak, it would have been encouraged by my father. And then After it was all said and done with, I would have got it again. I would have been disciplined and spanked again. This is a problem that I see, the root cause of why these little heathens behave the way that they do. There's no discipline in the home. Now, granted, some people will make the argument that they say, well, the parents aren't there because of the economy. They have to work 2 or 3 jobs apiece, yada, yada, yada. That's no excuse. That is no excuse whatsoever. All of these things, again, point back to the propaganda that I mentioned in our previous show. They're labeling events for a certain desired response of the populace. They're creating all these different excuses. They want things to snowball, rolling downhill in order to alleviate the blame placed on themselves. It's purposely designed to where there's no discipline in the home. Government intervention in homes, we've seen it with certain agencies like Child Protective Services, although there are certain needs for intervention when the parents are abusive and neglectful of their children. I'm not disputing that. What I am disputing is they want to take it to the extreme level of saying, well, your child come to school today and he seems to feel a little sad. And we asked him why he said he couldn't tell us, so we want to have a family interview. We want to pry into your life. When you do that, you are setting up your family and your children to be failures later on in life. Children have been told that they don't have to listen to their parents. Their parents don't have the authority or right to discipline them. So the children behave in the way that they think that they can because they're told 2 different ways. There's the way that the interventionist would tell them to behave, and then they're going against what the parents did. And the parents have given up. Well, there's nothing we can do. You know, it's out of our hands. We're afraid to discipline our children because we don't want to go to jail. Wrong. This is one of the core problems of why these social miscreants and deviants and heathens are stalking police officers, thumbing their noses at authority because they have 0 discipline.
And, you know, it also goes down the line that we're not having kids compete with each other. You know, this comes with the whole sort of medal for showing up, and I've never understood that. It kind of started when I was growing up, and it's just ballooned and blossomed into this ugly flower of death and destruction that is really weakening our country. But back to the deviant. So this deviant who filmed the video copied the Virginia shooter who had gunned down his former colleagues by filming himself having the gun visible. This reeks of copycat nonsense, and this madness seems to be an epidemic. Killing someone simply for doing their job is completely wrong. It shows just how twisted these individuals are. And before anyone attempts to completely label this as a sort of mental illness thing, remember that when you commit a crime, the test is a legal one for sanity. Many people confuse the term insanity with the various terms of mental illness. Mental illness may be a contributing factor to insanity, but insanity is a legal and not a medical definition. You know, insanity occurs when a person accused of committing a crime acknowledges that they committed said crime, but argue that they cannot be held responsible for it because of their mental state at the time that they at the time that they did the act. By pleading not guilty by reason of insanity, they're seeking a justification, something that says, I really cannot be held accountable for it because I was not within my right mind. In other words, in most states, the determination is based on the 1843 English case of McNaughton. Now, just to give you a little background on that, Daniel McNaughton was an Englishman who shot and killed the secretary of the British Prime Minister because he believed that the Prime Minister was conspiring against him. The court acquitted McNaughton by reason of insanity, and he was placed in a mental institution for the rest of his life. The entire test for determining whether the accused is insane is whether they could distinguish between right and wrong, irrespective of whatever mental illness they might have. Even though the case is from England and dates back to 1843, it is still the standard for insanity in nearly half of the 50 states. And this was actually brought up in criminal cases in the United States dating back to that time. It was based off of the understandings of the courts when it came to this sort of common law, and the MacNaughton common law is still very, very applicable in most states. So, based on the above, we could easily state that the person who was filming this horrible film understood the difference between right and wrong. The cameraman showed premeditation by planning the video. It was clearly planned and not some impulsive act. He chose not to fire upon the officer, and he also chose to publish the video on social media. But you know what? If he had acted on this, some media pundit somewhere, or the sniveling president, or some other disingenuous piece of garbage would lay the blame at an inanimate object or some abstract notion which would be used to excuse the behavior and target the fundamental unalienable rights of the citizens. Like the hysteria over the Confederate battle flag after the Charleston church shooting in June. By the way, what has happened to the furor over that? I haven't heard a thing in quite a while. Could it be that they've run out of steam?
Well, I think that was just a flash in the pan. Again, it was more of an example of propaganda being utilized, which is all this administration and coercion with the media. It seems to be their forte. That's all they do. They grab onto something, run it to its fullest tilt, and expect it to stick with the people, and then move on to something else. But they seem to forget everything else, and they expect other individuals to forget it, which sadly often happens. Now, when you made mention of an inanimate object being blamed for this, I could see it now. If charges were ever brought against this individual, this little heathen, my guess is that he would claim that it's the camera's fault, because the camera, it took the photo. I didn't expect it to work so well, and since it worked so well, I can't be held responsible for the camera functioning the way it should. Even though I pushed the button on it, I didn't expect it to work that way. That would be akin to somebody saying, well, I know what the gun's capable of doing, but because I pulled the trigger, I didn't expect it to actually fire or discharge a round. That's how they try to lump that in with their insanity plea in most cases. They fully understand the causation that could happen, the ramifications. They fully understand the full gamut of that, but yet they try to skirt around it and have some sense of deniability. With the Confederate battle flag issue, I'm also perplexed as to why nothing has been talked about in the past weeks. It wasn't that long ago. Here we are in October. The shooting happened in June. So 4 months have passed, almost 4 months have passed, and for a whole month there was nothing but talk about it, and then it just went away. Why? These are the questions that we need to ask ourselves and utilize as an analysis basis of understanding what is happening with our country, why our Constitution is being attacked, why our rights are being attacked, and ultimately, possibly, maybe stripped from us if we allow that to happen. And the answer is, it's all done by design. They want these things. Again, in order for propaganda to be effective, it has to be timed at the optimum moment. There has to be applications and scenarios for it to be attached to. If there's nothing going on that they can attach this Confederate battle flag scenario to, they're not going to use it, because if they continue to use it, it will completely destroy their method of delivering the propaganda.
And taking the propaganda message even further, when you look at what they did in response to the Virginia shooter, they found in his apartment the rainbow pride flag, yet they didn't attach the same devious nature to that flag that they tried to on a much more historical flag. And again, it goes to the point that that would work against the kind of propaganda message that they have been weaving. And so this web of deceit is spreading as far as the eye can see, and the government's continuing to step away from that. And, you know, what's really tragic about it is you have people like Ben Carson, who gets up in front of the podiums and he says he's only fine with the Confederate battle flag flying on private property. Well, there's a scenario for those who have family members who had actually passed away in the Civil War and happened to fight for the losing side, the Confederacy, who are buried on national cemeteries. You know, there's been proposed legislation to prohibit them from laying the Southern Cross battle flag on these graves. Yet that's the flag that those people fought for. And, you know, speaking to the propaganda aspect of it again, you know, when a lot of this came out and there were comments in the whole furor of the media out there and people were leaving comments on web articles, they kept making this comparison of the Southern Cross to the swastika. They called it the American swastika. But if you stop and think about it for a moment, this comparison between the Confederate States of America and Nazi Germany makes no sense. Nazi Germany was the National Socialist German Workers' Party. The whole Holocaust was a huge redistributive program designed to redistribute the wealth. It is more akin to the type of stuff we see from the Democrats than from any Confederate. In fact, the Confederacy was wholly opposed to a centralized government. They were pushing to go back more to the model of the Articles of Confederation. And again, this points to another aspect that Jeremy and I have spoken of time and again on this program, and that is this revisionist history that is just killing us. Because when you look at how they try and change the history of what the Confederate government stood for, you start to see that they narrow it down to one issue, slavery. And nobody in the South is arguing that slavery was a good thing or that we want to revise slavery. And if you heard the media's message on it, they were acting as though civil rights reforms had never occurred and that we had basically just stepped out of the event that happened over 150 years ago. But if slavery was wholly the issue, then I'm perplexed as to why the first article of the Confederate Constitution actually outlawed the international slave trade. That is, the import and export of slaves into the Confederate States of America. And by the way, that's something that went a step further even than the United States Constitution. Now, sure, a lot of the people that are against the Confederacy and are against people displaying stuff, they'll go to the articles of secession that were put out, and you'll see that it's mentioned time and time again, slavery. Well, yes, but you have to look at it in the context of the mindset of the time. And let's be honest, race relations back then were certainly nothing like they are today, and there was a perceived hierarchy. Even Abraham Lincoln would be a quote-unquote white supremacist by today's standards. But when you view it as what it was in the proper confines and context of the time, it was a property issue. So, as they were being used mainly for agricultural purposes, imagine if it had come down today that the EPA all of a sudden said that, you know, in the southern states, tractors that are used for agricultural purposes will now be taxed exorbitantly, and we're going to outlaw them because they cause global warming, and therefore we're going to just say that you have to give them up, and we're not going to pay you for it either. So you're just going to lose your property. I have a feeling that if there were articles of secession, you would see tractors mentioned a lot. And this is not to belittle slavery. It's just to bring it kind of into a modern context, to get an impression of how the 19th century mind would have looked at it. And folks, we have to be careful, because if we judge historical figures by modern social mores, imagine how posterity might judge us.
Well, there's another thing that is left out of the history books. Speaking to the revisionist history aspect, you have the Corwin Amendment, which would have been the original 13th Amendment to the United States Constitution. The Corwin Amendment actually spoke of slavery remaining legal, that it would have perpetuated slavery under the auspice that, again, as you mentioned, the slaves at that time were considered to be chattel or property, and under the Constitution, people had the right to own property. The Dred Scott case talks about this, so on and so forth. But what people need to understand is with the Corwin Amendment, Abraham Lincoln actually supported it. Now, Abraham Lincoln was quoted as saying, I'm paraphrasing, if slavery being kept in the Union would allow for the Union to remain as a whole, then he would support it. If abolishing slavery would be the means that kept the Union as a whole, he would support that. Abraham Lincoln was a fence sitter when it came to the issue of slavery. He didn't care either which way. So long as the Union was still intact, that's all he cared about. So this notion of, people having the mindset, again with revisionist history, that Abraham Lincoln freed the slaves, number one, that never happened. They want to make the argument that it was the Emancipation Proclamation that did so. Well, if that was the case, then we would not have the need for the 13th Amendment, which abolished slavery. Fact of the matter is, the Emancipation Proclamation was a fancy way of saying executive order. And executive orders do not carry any weight as enforceable law on the people of the United States. They only pertain to actions or regulations carried out within the executive branch itself. It cannot extend out, for if it could extend out, then we would have no need for a legislative branch of our government. All that legislative authority would be vested in the executive branch, and surely it wouldn't be called the executive branch. But the notion that Abraham Lincoln actually freed the slaves is, to me, it's mind-boggling. And again, this is what people were taught. Hell, I was taught that growing up, until I read research on it and I was pointed in the direction of, no, this is really what happened. And it makes perfect sense. If he freed the slaves, how was it that he did that when he was dead and cold and in the ground 6 months prior to the 13th Amendment being ratified to the Constitution? Again, this is all revisionist history. It's this ideology that if we change history ever so slightly over a long period of time in incremental doses, eventually the generations that are learning the history, they'll be weaned from it. It will become vacant in their minds over a longer period of time, to where that way we don't even have to teach it anymore. Therefore, if we're not teaching it anymore, it's non-existent, and that's how they destroy history. That's how they're looking to destroy the Constitution. It's certainly not taught in schools anymore. Absolutely not taught in schools. They may touch on it with the Bill of Rights or the preamble to the Constitution, but that's about it. It's not taught in public schools in the vast majority of the country. And that's a sad thing. It needs to be brought back and taught into the schools. It's written in a syntax where a fifth grader can understand it. I say we have individuals teach it to the fifth graders, or even teach it to third graders. Children now, for some reason, seem to be a little bit more advanced in their intellect. I'm not sure why. I'm not a child psychiatrist or psychologist. I don't understand why it would. All I know is I've witnessed it myself. Children nowadays seem to be that much more intellectual as far as adapting to their surroundings and picking things up a lot quicker. It's from that process of being a child through adolescence and early adulthood, that's where we lose them. And we lose them, again, by design, because they're put into these situations and they're being taught false history.
Right. And another aspect of it, imagine, if you will, if we applied modern approaches to the historical context. Because as you had mentioned, the 13th Amendment was ratified after the death of Abraham Lincoln. So let's go back to the actual death of Abraham Lincoln. If we applied modern social media type trends to what happened back then, they would have immediately been asking to ban Derringer pistols because the president had been assassinated with one. And, again, it would be blaming an inanimate object for the wickedness of an individual. And some people are just plain evil. There is right and there is wrong. Moral relativists would deny that at each and every step of the way, but the fact of the matter is there really is a right and a wrong. In fact, legal sanity, as I had mentioned earlier, is wholly defined off of that basis in over half of the several states. But speaking of associating strange things with motives for heinous acts, the deviant Oregon shooter has apparently put out a rambling manifesto. That's the other thing that is common with these mass shooters who go on these rampages. They seek to justify their actions based on these horrific and rambling manifestos. Anyway, the deviant claimed that he was upset that he didn't have a girlfriend. I mean, seriously? Attacking people who profess the Christian faith because you can't find a girlfriend? I know that the dating world isn't exactly the most fun thing to be run through, but I have a feeling that this jerk came across as an oddball. And who would want to date an oddball? Especially one like that. So it's obvious that the troll had a low opinion of himself and decided that he should take out a bunch of innocent people with him. If I'm not mistaken, it has also been reported by the authorities that he offed himself, committed suicide. It's just sick, but it also demonstrates a larger problem festering under the surface of modern society. Masculinity is something which has been targeted by the media and Hollywood types. Everywhere you turn, whether it's a movie or a commercial, you find that men who show masculine characteristics are under attack. They're lampooned. They're written off as being somehow violent or aggressive in a horrific way. The reasons for this are multifactored, but it has been getting worse over the past 2 decades. There's a concerted effort to attack traditional societal roles, whether they be gender roles, whether they be class roles, whether they be business roles, it doesn't matter. But what it is doing is leading to deviant behavior like we've seen exhibited by this moron.
Well, then you have instances, talking about the emasculation of the American male. You have instances to where, and I don't know if anybody else has seen this video, but I saw this video of this girl, and I can't remember her name. It really doesn't matter what her name is, because what she said in the video is complete lunacy. She told a story of how she was at a party or some gathering, people were drinking this and that, so on and so forth, and they were swimming. Well, she apparently dove off a diving board or a dock out in a body of water, and when she did, she hit her head, became unconscious, and began to sink in the body of water. a male individual, according to her, came to her rescue, but now she's suing him for what she's deeming as rescue rape. Because he put his hands on her in an attempt to save her life, but because she was unconscious and she couldn't ask for his help, he intervened like a good Samaritan, and now is being sued by her for rescue rape because he touched her without her consent. When stuff like this happens, and it's fueled and fanned like a flame that should be extinct, and it's allowed to happen, we're going to see more and more instances come up of emasculation in different areas. Young men who are given hormonal shots because they've been told that, well, you were supposed to be a girl, but you were born a boy, but we thought initially you were going to be a girl, and we really wanted a girl. What it is, it's the parents, in this case, brainwashing this child into thinking that they are actually a female rather than a male, and now they are subjecting themselves to hormonal shots to change their physical and emotional appearance and characteristics into something that they think they should have been. Or you see individuals like Bruce Jenner, or Bruised Gender as I call him. He wants to be called Caitlyn. Too bad. I have a few other names I could call him, but I don't think they'd be appropriate in this setting. Fact of the matter is, when you have an individual like that, 60 years old or so, who's been through life, knows the difference between right and wrong, but makes an excuse because they want to do something that's so flamboyant to get attention. People can have enough attention on their own just by doing average, ordinary, everyday things. You don't need to do something that extravagant to bring attention to yourself, Bruised Gender. It just doesn't need to be done. This is the problem. This is part of the problem that's plaguing our society. And it's all wrapped up in the shroud of political correctness. Because now you can't say anything bad against it because it's considered to be a hate crime. Because it's politically incorrect to disparage someone who has been deemed as a courageous individual. You want to know a courageous individual? How about the second person in that college, at Umpqua Community College, when that shooter told everybody to stand up and state what religion they are, if they are Christian believer. The first individual says, I'm a Christian, and he shot them. You want to talk about courage? How about the second individual that said, I'm a Christian too? Knowing full well what the ramifications may be at that point. That's courage. Not having gender reassignment surgery and making yourself to look like you belong on the box of Fruit Loops instead of Wheaties.
And you know, it's interesting to note also that when you look at the fact that he targeted people for professing the Christian faith, again, Obama made no mention of this. And tying this back into the propaganda aspect of it, as you had mentioned earlier, Jeremy, it really does show that it doesn't fit the pre-prepared agenda that the president had in mind when he rushed to the pulpits to speak to the media. His entire purpose there was to, again, condemn gun-owning Americans, trying to paint them as the deviants when it was clearly this wild and confused individual who is just crying because he can't find somebody to date, and for some reason that pushes him over the deep end to start shooting people who profess to be Christians. No. But again, the president didn't address that, and the good people of Roseburg, Oregon, where Umpqua Community College is located, I really do admire these people. And there's something to be said for the decent citizens of Roseburg. In his bid to completely politicize the tragedy that unfolded at the Umpqua Community College, President Obama has allegedly planned a trip to the region to meet with family members. Well, that's not sitting over well with many in the Roseburg community. The sheriff has already gone on the record stating that gun control is not the answer. That, of course, doesn't sit well with the mantra that Obama is trying to sell to the people. From what I've read, the people of Rosenberg don't want to lose their unalienable right to keep and bear arms. But President Obama has already taken the position of moving full steam ahead with respect to the gun control issue. It's always baffled me how the left can claim that they are touting new ideas when they keep rolling out the same tired and failed policies of the past. In truth, I would argue that they are intellectually bankrupt. One thing is for certain: it would be tactless of the president to make a trip to the region in order to politicize the issue. It's bad enough that he's already gone out before the media demanding that the issue be politicized. A person of true class, irrespective of their political leanings, would allow the families to mourn in peace. Common courtesy would dictate as much, but that seems an alien concept to President Obama. Yet, every time he has waded into controversial topics and made his presence known, it has been in a tactless manner. It's funny. He was able to send members of his administration to the Michael Brown funeral, and was able to talk to the Trayvon Martin case and talk about it openly, yet he refused to send anyone to the late Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher's funeral. Obama was sending a clear message with this. There is only a certain type of person he cares about, and even then, it isn't out of a sense of care, but out of a sense of opportunism. Like Jeremy said on the last program, this is perfectly in line with the propaganda agenda laid out by Joseph Goebbels. The political message is all that matters, not the people. And that explains why many of the residents of Roseburg, Oregon, are none too happy about the president's proposed trip.
I have an idea. If that is a gun-free zone, and if he's going to make this trip and make some kind of stump speech there at Umpqua Community College, with it being a gun-free zone, it would surely suggest and be perfectly lawful for his Secret Service officers to not be on the property with their firearms, would it not? If he truly believes what he's telling the American people about we need to enact gun control, we need to have safety, shouldn't he adhere to the laws, although illegitimate as they are, but still adhere to them when he gives these speeches at these places, when he steps foot on a gun-free zone surrounded by Secret Service? I don't think he'll do that. Why won't he do that? Because he doesn't truly believe everything that he says. He doesn't believe it in the notion that he wants other people to believe. See, he's using this as a bait and switch. He wants to tell people, well, we need gun control this, gun control that, so that he can get other people to do the work for him. See, this is a distinct difference between him and Adolf Hitler. Adolf Hitler, yes, had individuals doing things for him. However, Adolf Hitler had to do the groundwork and lay the groundwork for himself and those other individuals to do what they did. For Obama, the groundwork is already laid. He already has individuals that are expendable that he can throw under the bus, many of which he has, in order to further perpetuate his agenda, which is the ultimate agenda of the Fabian Society and socialism. And people want to say, well, Obama's a Muslim. No, he's not. I don't believe that he's a Muslim. Is he sympathetic to Muslims? Absolutely. You know who else is sympathetic to Muslims? Adolf Hitler. Adolf Hitler wasn't a Muslim. but he was sympathetic to them. In fact, he utilized them to perpetuate his agenda. That is exactly what Obama is doing. If Obama truly was a Muslim, the Muslim community, and under the rule of Islam, he would actually be declared as an apostate. But that declaration has not been made. So people think that because Islamic community and the rule of Islam has not labeled him as an apostate, he must be a Muslim. No, he's sympathetic to them. He is not a Muslim. Even though he said, my Muslim faith. Well, I think that was taken out of context as well. He was raised part of his life in Indonesia. Went to a Muslim school, so on and so forth. He was involved in studying the Quran, so on and so forth. I don't believe he's a Muslim. He may practice the religion. He may practice Christianity. Nobody really is sure exactly what religion he is. He claims to be a Christian. If that's the case, if Mr. Obama, if you are truly a Christian individual, then you would not be doing the dastardly, devious things that you are doing to destroy this country. It would be diametrically opposed to what you're doing.
Right, but there is a faith he follows, an undeniable faith he follows. Statism. He believes in the almighty state, and he wants the state to control each and every one of us, even though that is diametrically opposed to what our Constitution stands for. And that's the thing that we have to realize about the radical left that foams and froths at the mouth as they attempt to gain more power. It is that they want to see the state crush the American people because they don't want the American people to be able to care for themselves. They want to be able to take that responsibility because it means that they can amass wealth from it. Speaking of Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party, if you consider what had happened in Nazi Germany by the time that they had taken the reins of power, they were using that power to amass extensive amounts of wealth for themselves. It's sickening to the extent at which it went, because if you look at what they did in the Holocaust, stripping gold fillings from human teeth, melting it down to then be used for the nefarious plots of the Nazis, stealing their jewelry, stealing their valuable personal belongings to be able to line the pockets of SS members, that is truly reflective of a socialist government. And you can see that same kind of mentality with some of the nameless, faceless bureaucrats that are pushed by these expansive government programs by the extreme left. Now, switching gears for a moment, according to Mark Scott at the New York Times, Europe's highest court struck down an international agreement which allowed companies to transfer people's digital data between the European Union and the United States. This is pretty huge in that it leaves companies like Google and Facebook in a dreaded legal gray area. The reasoning used by the European Court of Justice was that the agreement was flawed in that it allowed American governmental agencies and authorities to access Europeans' online information, thereby violating their various rights to privacy. What's also interesting is the court cited leaks from former NSA contractor Edward Snowden. The court held that it was obvious that the United States government had almost unfettered access to the data, infringing upon Europeans' rights to privacy. Of course, this should also have a bigger impact on American citizens who have had their data mined in such a fashion. The FISA court is both secretive and intrusive. It violates the Fourth and Sixth Amendment rights of those subject to the data mining, which, by the way, is pretty much everyone in the United States. And law enforcement agencies should go through the traditional warrant process. Now, of course, law enforcement will argue that this is too cumbersome and time-consuming and that they need ready access to the information. That might be well and good in a dictatorship, But pursuant to Section 2 of Article 6, the Constitution is the supreme law of the land, and the Fourth and Sixth Amendments are applicable. That's the problem with our legal system currently. There are too many examples of the courts operating outside the scope and application of the United States Constitution.
You know, and when law enforcement agencies and the courts act in that fashion, you always see appeal after appeal after appeal filed. And appeals are always, not all of them are overturned, but some of them are. And in some rare circumstances, you come across what's known as the fruit of the poisonous tree doctrine, to where the evidence was actually obtained illegally, therefore it cannot be utilized, and since that evidence cannot be utilized, it causes the courts to reverse their decision. When we look at the legal system and the courts and whatnot, and I'm not as well versed in it as Randy at this point in time, soon enough, but as of right now, I only know what I know. There has to be a strict adherence to the Constitution. It is the supreme law of the land, as Randy mentioned, as per Article 6, Clause 2. And as we mentioned in our Constitutional Series, Part 1, the preamble to the Bill of Rights, it specifically states that any and all articles ratified to the Constitution after that point carry the full weight of intents and purposes of the original Constitution, meaning they are absorbed into the Constitution as a whole and operate under the auspice of being the supreme law of the land. So when they want to ignore the Fourth Amendment and the Sixth Amendment because of expediency, they're violating law in order to enforce law. You can't do that. This is where these appeals come from and what they're based on. Now, some appeals are based on other things, and they're not overturned, or the appeals don't work the way that the appellant may want them to, but they're revisited and revisited. They're put on the record. They're actually set as some kind of precedent for reflection on. We have to get back to, again, the full understanding and applicability of the Constitution in these situations. Failure to do that is only going to be nothing more than a continuance of us, and I'll paint the picture of being on a freight train without brakes that decides to jump track and tries to make its way to its destination down a winding dirt road. It's going to be nothing but catastrophic for all involved.
And that's exactly right. And see, the problem is we've gotten so many what they call code laws. Those are your statutory laws that start to break away from the Constitution. And then you have what is known as common law, or court-applied law, precedent, basically, that also strips away from the Constitution. So, slowly but surely, the courts, over the course of at least 208 years or so, going back to 1803, have been stripping away the constitutional application of the law. And that immediately brings into question all of these legal decisions that have been made. You know, the Sixth Amendment speaks to your ability to face your accuser, yet in the FISA court, that doesn't happen. It's totally in secret. You don't have the right to an attorney to represent you within the FISA court. That, too, is completely violative of the United States Constitution. And until we start to repair these problems and to actually and adequately address them, we are going to continue to see this Orwellian nightmare swirl and surround the United States, plunging us further towards the abyss of tyranny and despotism. And that's exactly what the left wing has done. But it's not just the left wing. It's the detente or establishment wing of the GOP that has done this as well. The Patriot Act has been used to create things like the FISA court and to further obfuscate the unalienable rights of the American people. That, of course, is diametrically opposed to what the United States is supposed to be about. It also goes against what our founding fathers intended with the creation of this government. And as Jeremy and I have said before, as long as we allow this to continue unabated, we're going to continue to have these problems. Now, another story comes out of NBC 10 in Philadelphia. Police have arrested a suspect who prompted a lockdown at a local community college. Police claim that a man threatened a student with a gun and then ran into a campus building. Once again, Philadelphia is one of those cities with fairly stringent gun control laws. Officers had searched the building in which people had reported that the alleged gunman had run into, but they found no gunman. Consequently, the police expanded the search to include other classroom buildings and a parking garage. What's worse about this is that authorities had warned local universities and area colleges about a nondescript online threat of violence. So we're already facing a wave of copycat deviants. Apparently, this wasn't the first time a firearm scare had hit that community college. In May 2014, a student had brandished a gun in the west building of the main campus because he was upset over another student, quote, ratting on him, close quote. He is now serving 4 years of probation on weapons charges. Again, gun-free zones are unenforceable, and they had led to this sort of madness occurring. Thankfully, this has not turned into another tragedy, because if it had, you can rest assured that the president would be harping on about it and planning visits there as well. That's the thing. President Obama has already planned to visit with families of the Umpqua Community College victims. He wants to use this as a photo op to help push his anti-gun agenda. Each and every call for increased gun control is a short-sighted attempt to deprive law-abiding citizens of their fundamental right to keep and bear arms. It's always been about power and control for the government. If they can use the tragedy for propaganda value, they will exploit it for such purposes. President Obama has already proven this by his callous statement that we should politicize the issue. Apparently, he already has a set of executive orders in the work to subvert the Second Amendment. Again, this is an unconstitutional abuse of executive power. Pursuant to the United States Constitution, the President of the United States is not enumerated with legislative powers, as Jeremy had already mentioned earlier. Yet, this imperial president has utilized executive orders and actions in such a way as to grant himself this extra-constitutional power. Again, folks, Clause 2, Article 6, clearly forbids this, as the United States Constitution is the supreme law of the land.
What would stop the president, whether it's Obama or any president, should these extra constitutional authorities be allowed to exist and to continue on? What would stop them from issuing an executive order that says, well, no longer are we going to have, voting for individuals when it comes to presidential elections. We're just going to go ahead and allow the states to cast their votes, but the individuals' votes aren't going to matter. And then we could change the electoral process. What's stopping them from doing that? Because it's obvious that our Congress, the legislative body of our government that is constitutionally established, is feckless. I don't see anybody standing up and saying, you can't do this, And we're not going to allow you to do this. In fact, if you think you're going to do this and try to do it, we're going to impeach you. We're going to bring you up on charges of high crimes and misdemeanors and have you impeached. Why don't they do this? They want to have all these committees and these hearings about everything, but yet nothing comes of any of them. Look at Benghazi. Now, Randy, you and I both know that if either one of us or any one of our passengers or listeners would have been in that position and made a decision on Benghazi that was made, it would be an open and shut case against us. Why is it that these individuals that hold this authority seem to be placed above the law? And it's not just them placing themselves above the law. They're being held there like on a pedestal. It reminds me of Cleopatra or any other previous ruler of any country being carted around on a throne that is carried by the people, paraded around in front of everybody else, lifted up higher than everybody else. And it is those people that are involved in the administration process of, that particular ruler, i.e. our Congress, kowtowing to these individuals. They're not doing anything to knock them off that pedestal and hold them accountable. And because they're not doing anything of value that's bringing any kind of results, they're complicit in these actions. Time and time again, we've seen issues to where, with Eric Holder, lying in front of Congress, committed perjury in one particular session 14 plus times, committed perjury in front of Congress. Was he found in contempt of Congress and thrown in jail? No. Why? It continues on and continues on and continues on. This is the basis of it. They're feeding off of each other. They don't want to relinquish their authority. I say it needs to be taken away from all of them by the will of the people.
Well, yes, as long as they continue to act in this way, where they cement power for themselves at the expense of the American people, they are not ruling in a justified fashion. And see, what people need to remember is that you cannot rule in the United States without the consent of the governed. And so, when you had things like the CIA, or not the CIA, but the IRS targeting scandal, which, by the way, that's gone nowhere, where you have things like Benghazi, where you have these political elites that have done everything in their power to separate themselves from the American people and have a separate legal system apply to them, you're not ruling by consent. You're ruling by fiat, and it's despicable to see. But there is this type of corruption and hypocrisy which lies at the heart of Washington, D.C. The first time I ever visited Washington, D.C., it was back in... Oh, not the first time, it'd be the second time. It was back in 2002. I recall seeing an anti-tobacco lobbyist running across kind of the lobbyway that you have before you get to the actual chamber of the House. And he was smoking a cigar, and yet his lapel was... Citizens Against Tobacco. He was one of those anti-smoking lobbyists, and yet there he was smoking. To me, that personifies the type of corruption, the wanton corruption that just makes the average American's blood boil when he or she looks at Washington, D.C. Because it perfectly demonstrates the type of contempt that they hold us in. And it shows the type of disconnect that the Washington elites have with the people. And there really is this kind of atmosphere there that you feel the air is somehow tainted and it is somehow corrupting you as you walk through the city. These marble palaces which make them think they're gods. It literally goes to their heads, and they start to think that they are gods. Now, Jeremy, there's a connection between a certain type of gun violence and the treatment of the police, because, this is also being pushed by the disconnected elites in Washington. In the wake of the Freddie Gray case, Baltimore has seen a spike in homicides and shooting. Again, Maryland has relatively strict gun control laws on the book, and they are punishing their police officers for enforcing the law. When law enforcement officers are threatened with criminal prosecution, both at the state and federal levels, for doing their job, it makes sense that the police would be apprehensive about patrolling and making, rather commonplace arrests. This current administration wants to have a different set of laws, as you were talking to, apply to someone because of their racial or ethnic background at the common level, and then, of course, on class distinctions, too. Because they literally are setting themselves up as a separate ruling political class. Of course, that's completely against the Constitution. But what about this government and administration has been about following the principles of our Constitution? At every turn, they have maneuvered to belittle and attack the Constitution. So, the problem that is erupting in Baltimore and Chicago is a direct result of a two-pronged problem. First, the law-abiding citizens of these communities are all but unable to procure a firearm due to the draconian anti-gun legislation which is in place at these cities. Second, when law enforcement is attacked for attempting to carry out their duties, it creates a hostile work environment for our law enforcement officers. This is a recipe for disaster. Yet you won't hear the president go on the national media to address the dangers created by these two prongs. Again, you won't hear it from him because it contradicts the narrative he's attempting to thrust down our throats. Well, folks, you'll hear it from us. Gun control laws and attacking the police based on a radical leftist agenda only exacerbates the problems faced by decent law-abiding citizens everywhere. Stripping citizens of their unalienable rights won't solve the problem either. The president keeps mentioning common sense gun laws. No, Mr. President, we need common sense enforcement of the law and common sense adherence of the Constitution. It really is common sense to follow the tenets of the Second Amendment. It's common sense because the Constitution is the supreme law of the land. There really should be no question about that. What would be the common sense approach here would be to strike down any of these unconstitutional gun ownership restrictions. Remember, an armed society is a polite society. I cannot stress that any more than I already have. Yet the president refuses to listen to real common sense.
Speaking to the law enforcement being apprehensive about doing their job, what that's doing is completely undermining. They're being put in a situation to where they look like the bad guys, and what the government is doing when they make these statements and put these restrictions on them, they're completely undermining the auspice of protect and serve. A lot of people think that protect and serve means, well, you have to do what we tell you to do, and you have to protect us from crimes being committed against us. No, our law enforcement officers are not superheroes. They are not comic book superheroes. They are superheroes in other ways because they put their lives at risk. They wake up every single morning, put on their garb and their badges and guns, kiss their family members, their wives and children goodbye, because their whole job, their number one duty, is to go home at the end of the shift. That is the first and foremost. That should be their first inkling and priority. They are willing to go out there and do the job that many people won't do. But it seems that many people that won't go out and do that job seem to think that they know everything there is to know about law enforcement. I don't even know everything there is to know about law enforcement. Yes, I have a degree in criminal justice. Yes, I understand how law enforcement operates. I understand the basics of it. I've been in classes where we've had scenarios, where we've done active shooter training. We've looked at interviewing, interrogation, how police officers are to conduct themselves through ethics, so on and so forth. And I wrote a paper regarding speaking specifically to protective and serve. And what I put in that paper and what I espoused to my classmates was this. To protect and serve in the means of the law enforcement officers, number one, they protect the Constitution. They protect the Constitution and the constitutional rights of individuals after a crime has been committed. They are not proactive, they are reactive. They only come on the scene after the fact of a crime being committed, unless they are investigating an ongoing crime. And is there chances and opportunities to where they've showed up during the commission of a crime? Yes. At that point in time, they act accordingly. But the fallacy of the American people to look at it and say their job is to protect us from evil things and crimes happening to us. Wrong. Your job is to protect yourself. Their job also with the serve aspect is to serve at the will of the community. And since the will of the community has been twisted and metamorphosed into this notion that people are believing, well, law enforcement officers they're the evil ones. They're the bad guys. The will of the community has changed. So it speaks to volumes as to why these law enforcement officers are apprehensive. Not only because of the restrictions placed on them, or possible penalties they may face at the state and federal level, but look at the lashback that will ensue should they try to correct the community or still try to uphold the constitutional oath that they took. If the community doesn't want them to do it, it's because the community has been told that they don't want the law enforcement officers to behave in the way that they are originally instituted as. And this, again, is all done by design. It's done to create chaos. It's done to break down the will of the community so people are subservient to that of the perpetuators of the propaganda and any administration that would use those community or any incident that happens for their advancement of their own agenda.
Yes, and see, that's the thing about the criminal justice system in America. It is always designed to be reactive. It was always thought that the individual is straddled with the responsibility of protecting themselves. What the community police force is there for is to ensure that the infringements on the constitutional rights and morality of the community are kept to a minimum. It's to basically back up the rights of the individual. That's the service aspect. They serve to ensure that mass chaos does not spread through society, making it to where people cannot live out their unalienable rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Unfortunately, it's been bastardized in a way with this current administration. The way that they have attacked law enforcement, the way that they have attacked the Constitution, it is all chipping away at this for one greater purpose. And that greater purpose is the establishment of this utopian socialist Orwellian nightmare of a country. They don't want it to be the United States of America. They want it to be the subjected states of America. And believe me, they are working on this tirelessly to strip Americans of their God-given rights. And that is why it is so critical, crucial, and important that we continue to address these issues, because they apply to your everyday life. Without your rights, you have nothing. The government becomes the almighty master, and you become nothing but a serf. Again, as I called them last night, they are neo-fascists. feudalists. They want to create this stagnant serfdom here in the New World. And they will ride this out as if they are championing some equality. The only equality that the radical left in the United States, or indeed around the world, is equality in misery for those who are not part of the new neo-nobility. Stop and think about this for a moment. If you look at people like Joe Biden, who is floating out this idea that he's going to have the Hiawatha hussy Pocahontas Elizabeth Warren as a potential vice presidential running mate, you can see that they are already creating a type of nobility or aristocracy by which they will rule us. And this goes to the heart of the matter of what Jeremy was discussing earlier and what I was discussing earlier with this separation of laws and codes of conduct which apply to them but not to us. Hypocrisy is the new norm. It is the way of life in which these people have embraced, and they expect us to simply swallow it. They expect us to give up our individual initiative, our individual entrepreneurial spirit, our individual capabilities to suffer at the whims of their tried and failed policies of Marxist doctrine. But folks, Marxist doctrines fail. They are completely useless. So everything that you see this administration touches has turned to manure. They are hurting America's credibility, both abroad and at home. Let's take the Russian airstrikes at Syria, for example. Remember, a few years back when Obama made the comment about the red line that shouldn't be crossed? I bet you all remember that. I do. The president was bluffing, and the Syrian government called his bluff. Obama has been wishy-washy on foreign policy since he assumed the reins of power. He has supported those groups that have ties to ISIS and Al-Qaeda, but then backed down from any real action. Now, folks, there's an important case that is developed here with respect to ISIS. Apparently, one of the Navy SEALs who was involved in the raid that killed Osama bin Laden, ISIS has released his information. And this is because the president had to go out and have his narcissistic moment back in 2011, stating that he ran out and shot Osama bin Laden. I always thought that that was a tasteless speech that he gave that evening. But now, because he revealed that it was the SEALs that did it, these devious Islamo-fascists have gotten their claws into this information, and they have made it public. Now that SEAL is at extraordinary risk. And I am infuriated with this government for putting that brave soul at risk. This is completely intolerable, it's unacceptable, and it's un-American. But what about this administration has ever been pro-American? I can't think of anything off the top of my head, because they have done everything to deviate from the United States Constitution, to push us down, to belittle us, to besmirch our national character, heritage, and identity. Folks, our identity is comprised of the United States Constitution. And when you think about what the Obama administration has done to tear that apart, to strip it away from us, you have a clear indica of where his loyalties lie.
Well, furthermore with that, with him stripping away the Constitution and stripping away our individual identity as American citizens, so to speak, he's intruding into our personal lives at every chance that he can. This is a direct violation of the Constitution. An absurd violation of the Constitution. What gives him the authority, or anybody that he designates to do these things, any authority whatsoever, to be so invasive? Releasing information regarding a special forces unit that took down one of the world's most evil individuals having that information released and it falling into the hands of enemies of the United States by that way, individuals, some folks would argue that is a treasonous offense. Because now they are given aid by way of information, and they are declared enemies of the United States. The very definition of treason is giving aid and comfort to the declared enemy of the United States. What is aid defined as? Well, it could be medical supplies, rations of food, weaponry, information on operatives, information regarding the sanctity and closely guarded classified information of the United States and its operations. Any of those things. With the aid comes the comfort. They now have comfort in knowing that, well, they have information. Now they are comfortable with the fact that they may be able to act on that information. Remember the bombing that happened over in the Middle East of where CIA officers were killed in a gym. There was a bombing on a military base. How did they get that information? Well, it's been rumored that the information was given to Gitmo detainees in exchange for other information from them as a condition of their release from Gitmo to be sent back to their home countries. Why would we do this? Why would we do this? The manner and protocol and procedure of how we deal with enemy combatants of the United States, rogue militants who are not fighting under a sovereign banner or flag or nation. And the way we treat them is absolute lunacy. They are enemy combatants. People say, well, they have human rights too. No, they don't. Because these individuals that want to do these things, they want to destroy us. Given the opportunity, they will act on it. And they won't shed any tears. All they'll do is revel in their glory that they got to attack the infidel or the people that they completely despise, because they despise what we have. They despise our United States Constitution that ensures our freedoms and liberties. They don't have those things because they are not capable or willing to get those things for themselves. So they have to cause mass destruction and chaos. And every time they get that opportunity to do so, they will act on it. And then if we pander to them, instead of doing what needs to be done, having the mindset that these individuals want to kill us, you want to go after our citizenry. Under Article 4, Section 4 of the Constitution, it is the government's job, it is their duty to protect the states from invasion and against domestic violence. They are failed on that. They have failed with it because they are pandering to individuals that want to do nothing but mass destruction and harm to us. Why? Because they want to get a little bit more information. Oh, they weren't treated properly in Gitmo. Wrong. We don't subscribe to Protocol 1 of the Geneva Conventions. Other countries do. We do not. Therefore, when we come across a rogue militant, as described and defined under the Geneva Conventions, under Protocol 1, which we don't subscribe to, but also in other parts of the Geneva Convention, they are defined as enemy combatants of any country that does not fight for a sovereign nation or any nation that is established and adopted as part of the Geneva Convention protocols. They are rogue militants. They are assassins. They are criminals and terrorists. They have their own classification. Those individuals need to be dealt with in a swift and righteous manner. You extract the information from them, You put one behind the ears, and you put them out in the sand to be buried over. That is how you deal with these individuals that want to destroy you. That's how you take care of them. But our country has failed to act in that fashion. We've been restricted. Our military has been emasculated and broken down to where their hands have been tied. They cannot even engage in these individuals unless their lives are in imminent threat and danger, meaning that these individuals, they can attack our battalions, attack our soldiers, and even then our soldiers have to have permission to return fire. Why? This all speaks to the volumes of, again, another onslaught of dumbing down, emasculating our country, and removing the strength and authority of sovereign individuals to be able to protect themselves and to protect our homeland in accordance with the Constitution. This administration, and even past administrations, like Randy said, they don't want us to be the United States of America. They want us to be the subjective states of America. In fact, I don't even think they want the name America to be even associated with it anymore, because it leaves a bad taste in the mouth of would-be villainous, murderous, potentate, dictatorial, wannabe thugs. I can foresee it now coming to where the revisionist history is going to take hold, and our name, being America, is going to be dissolved and removed and done away with and ultimately forgotten if we don't ramp things up and we don't collectively remove our craniums from our rectal orifices and start to understand and begin to comprehend what's really at stake here.
It is entirely our sovereignty, our history, and our future. And in fact, President Obama has now actually come out and threatened Congress. He says he wants Gitmo to be shut down immediately, or else they aren't going to get any of the Pentagon funding that's necessary to be appropriated. Of course, that again is unconstitutional, but it just goes to show that at every level, this president is attempting to hold the nation hostage, and it's despicable. He really is acting outside of the interests of the American people and on his own selfish, utopian socialist agenda. Well, enough is enough. We won't tolerate this, and it cannot be tolerated, because it is attempting to tear our country apart at the seams. And so far, the feckless GOP has rolled over on every issue and given him everything. Just think back. He supported the Muslim Brotherhood as they took over Egypt. His entire foreign policy has made America weaker, and this has resulted in a power vacuum on the global theater. America must be robust in her ability to enforce her interests at home and abroad. But Obama has weakened our stance both domestically and in the foreign theater. Russia has utilized this to their advantage. They can see the blood in the water, and they're circling like a bunch of sharks. Global schoolyard bullies and tin-pot dictators are flexing their muscles, because we have an incompetent rube at the head of our country. This is shameful for each and every American. Yet we did bring it upon ourselves by ever allowing this man to be elected president. Americans must become better educated with respect to the United States Constitution. That sacred document explains exactly how this country should be. When government encroaches upon the rights of the citizens and ignores the bright line restrictions placed upon it by the Constitution, we find ourselves in a dangerous situation like we're in today. All of this has been by design, and it has significantly harmed our reputation and good standing as a nation. Our national identity, culture, heritage, and our national character have been tarnished by this insufferable joke of a president.
to expound on that, it's to me it's somewhat saddening, depressing, and disconcerting, but at the same time, there's a level of anger that comes with when I see things like this happening, and I ask myself, why are we allowing this to happen? Why are we allowing individuals to take the limelight, to stand up in front of people and say, this is what we're going to do? For a president of the United States, at any point in time, to blatantly come right out and violate the Constitution with the very words that he says, and not be held accountable for it. Why is that being allowed to happen? Why are people standing down and either ignoring what's going on, or they're hearing what's going on but they're not doing anything about it? Why isn't anybody saying anything? Ultimately, it reverts back to the people. Ladies and gentlemen, this is why we are doing this. We're not doing this to build ourselves up, to feed and stroke our own egos. And trust me, I have a very big ego. I will freely admit that. But I'm not on here bringing information to all of you to stroke my own ego. We wouldn't be able to do this if it wasn't for you. Because we are doing this for you. In hopes that you will take what we say, research it, analyze it, look into it, hopefully understand it, and then pass it on to others. That is what we're looking for. If we, the people, cannot stand together on the Constitution, support each other in exercising our rights, and band together to prevent this nation from being destroyed, torn apart at the seams, and tattered, and balled up, and just thrown away, then we have nothing to look forward to. The United States Constitution is the sole purpose of our existence as sovereign individuals. Without our rights, as Randy said, we have nothing. But without the means to protect our rights, that being the Second Amendment, as that is the body armor and the safeguard of the Constitution. Allowing gun-free zones to exist instead of people having an understanding of what the laws really pertain to, and making an effort locally and at state levels and then at the federal levels, all three, not just one or the other, but all three, at all three levels, saying, no, you are not going to deride us and deprive us of our constitutional rights. You're not going to make legislation that creates victimhood to be placed on our shoulders because of sycophantic and narcissistic criminal despots that want to do harm to me and mine. Until we do that, as a whole, as a sovereign nation, as my English teacher in high school said, the beatings will continue until morale is improved.
Knowledge is power, and that is why we are sharing this knowledge with you. Yes, we're addressing the problems as they come up, like any other radio show, but I think you'll find that the major distinction of what occurs here on the Wright Flyer is that we actually propose solutions. You can listen to any other radio program, and most of them won't proffer any reasonable solutions. Now, I know that detractors might say that proposing that we go back to the Constitution is not reasonable, but that's because they are either acting out of ignorance or they are pushing an agenda, an incorrect agenda, an agenda of tyranny and despotism. And of course, that is an agenda that should be rejected by each and every one of you. And, you know, we have a wonderful listener base. And I am certain that they are of the same individual, entrepreneurial, strong American spirit that has made us the cream of the crop of this entire world. But we have to be able to know when to stand up, to when to say no to those who are doing everything in their power to tear us down, to pit us against each other, to deprive us of our fundamental rights which were endowed to us by our creators. Folks, we say this because it is important, it's real, it's impactful, it's happening. As you look around you each and every day, you can see these encroachments. But you can also act. You can act by spreading the knowledge of the Constitution, by being proactive in the defense of this country. And as a citizen, that's part of the duty that we have, because rights always are coupled with duties. You cannot escape that simple fact or aspect of the country. You just can't. Now, the Associated Press put out a piece which perfectly exemplifies what I have been saying with respect to President Obama intentionally weakening the nation. Amelia Caldwell put out a piece which reports that the U.S. government has deported the fewest number of illegal aliens in nearly a decade. Folks, this is a reflection of the current policy of this administration. They are violating our immigration laws in order to score political points. Not only is this intolerable, it's absolutely illegal. But will Congress do anything about it? The answer is no. I'm sure you all recall, as I do, back during the midterm elections in 2014, the Republicans were essentially given a mandate to stop the Obama administration in its push to create so-called executive amnesty. Decent American citizens throughout the country were horrified and enraged to discover that the Obama administration had been shipping these illegal aliens throughout the United States. It's funny, the federal government wants to encroach upon our rights and intrude into aspects that go far beyond their enumerated powers. Yet, whenever one of the enumerated powers that are actually granted to them works against the agenda of this selfish administration, they ignore the law. This is tantamount to anarchy, and it is only serving to further weaken our country. Add to this the president's proposal to import supposed refugees from Syria, and we have another recipe for a looming disaster to strike the United States. Folks, we need to focus on our citizens and our Constitution.
Well, this harkens right back to what you and I have both said about eliminating the name that we live under, the United States of America, and being changed to the subjective states, because eventually they will erode the name America away from it. It will no longer have the meaning that it once had when our country was founded. Bringing in all of these illegal aliens through executive fiat, all at the same time while destroying our constitutional rights and stripping them from us. That's exactly what's happening. That's exactly how they accomplish this. Because if you take away the rights of the citizens and you bring in other new citizens, so to speak, now when the new citizens come in, they're automatically told and advised, well, you have these rights. Your rights are what we tell you that they are. Meanwhile, you eliminate the current populace. You let the you let them die out and go away while influxing a new populace in. Now you have supreme control of that new populace. You deride the rights of the current populace. Eventually they will die out. We, the people, will eventually die out. But it is up to us. This is why it is so imperative that the perpetuation of the understanding of the Constitution is so prominent. Because if we fail to adhere to it and perpetuate it to our posterity, as it says to do in the preamble of the Constitution, our lineage, our children and their children, and so on down the line, if we fail to teach that to our children or learn it ourselves and pass it on, this influx of new citizens coming in by way of executive fiat amnesty is going to completely eliminate, it will be the final nail in the coffin, so to speak, on what this great nation is. And remember, Obama said he wants to fundamentally change our country. He has done that. That is pretty much the only truth that he's upheld, that he spoke. Everything else has been a lie. He said he was going to fundamentally change the United States. He has done that. To his credit, that's the only truth that he has exhibited. People would say that here at the Wright Flyer, we have an agenda. No. We don't have an agenda here. We have the truth. The truth has no agenda. The truth is not black or white. It just is. The only time an agenda can be attached to any part of being a truth is when you take that truth and then you use one element of a truth and then you build lie upon lie upon lie on top of it in order to destroy the other elements of the truth that don't fit with your lies and agenda. That's when an agenda is created. Folks, we don't have an agenda here. We have the truth. We have a wish and a hope that the truth that we speak here is reflected on, understood, and then passed on amongst your families, your friends, your co-workers, so on and so forth. That is all we want to do with this. That is it. That we bring the truth, and we want the truth to be set free, because the truth will set you free. The United States Constitution is the most truthful document that we have ever created and written by the hand of man. To deny it or to push it aside because it doesn't fit with people's emotions, because people don't understand it, because they fear it, the truth hurts. The truth is a painful sting, and you know what? Pain is the ultimate teacher. People have to feel the pain of understanding the truth before it will finally sink into them, and then they can finally understand what's going on, and then they can act accordingly in accordance with the Constitution.
And that is why we always come back to the Constitution. It is the fundamental law of the United States of America. It is who makes us who we are. It is the national identity of the United States, because it is that great social contract that exists between each individual American citizen and the government. And when you understand that, and you understand that the purpose of it is to protect your rights, to ensure that despotic and tyrannical governments cannot march upon you, step upon your throat, and deprive you of your God-given liberties, all of a sudden it takes on that brilliant luster that it has, and it becomes a much greater thing. Whenever you try and say that the Constitution is a living document, you are actually taking away from it. Life is finite, but the tenets and principles of natural law which inspired and created the United States Constitution, they're timeless. It's immortal. It cannot be alive. The process may be living, and the notion that it is a contract with the people maybe living for as long as that person is alive. But the Constitution itself is infinite. It was designed to be that way. That was the brilliance of our founding fathers when they drafted that document. It is why it is filled with truth, as Jeremy has just stated. And of course, that is why we give such credence and importance to it, because it really does define each and every aspect of our society. All of the other tantamount, penultimate concerns of the people, whether it be the economy, whether it be, being able to make a living, all of that is actually tied to the Constitution. It really is. Every aspect of it is there. If you want to look at the economy, look at the targeting of companies like Gibson Guitar. They were raided by the EPA, an unconstitutional agency, because of a supposed endangered Brazilian redwood tree that they were using, which they actually didn't. This same batch of trees was used by Taylor Guitars, but because the CEO of Taylor was a close friend of this roguish administration and donated heavily to the campaign of Obama, they were not targeted. Folks, it's that kind of corruption that borders on fascism. If you want to know why our economy is suffering, it is because of the reckless way that the government has abandoned the United States Constitution. If we returned to the tenets and principles and restrictions of the United States Constitution, we would see our economy flourish again. The same thing with your jobs. Government regulation is what's killing your jobs. It's these unions that are in bed with government that are killing jobs, and all of that's in direct violation of the United States Constitution. So as you can see, all roads lead to the Constitution when it comes to most of the problems facing the United States today. And that is why it is so important that the American voters start thinking about these things in the framework and terms of the United States Constitution. Because when you have an understanding of the Constitution, all of a sudden the entire governmental edifice starts to make sense. With that said, folks, we've come time now for our descent. I'm Randy Wright, and I'm your captain, and joining me today, as always, is my first officer, Jeremy Grapington. We want to give you a heartfelt thanks, folks. We couldn't have done this without you. We appreciate every time you tune in, and we hope to see you next time. I'm going to go ahead and send the flight attendant around back for one last round of alcohol. So, folks, go ahead, sit back, relax, and enjoy the ending of this show as we bring it home one more time. Once again, thank you for joining us here at the Wright Flyer.